Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town. While her classmates painted their nails and gossiped about boys, she spent her afternoons at the local gym, perfecting her martial arts moves and building the kind of strength that made grown men think twice about challenging her. At 19, Sarah stood 5 feet 6 inches tall with muscles that rippled beneath her sun-kissed skin. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her brown eyes held a determination that seemed to burn from within. She had dreams that stretched far beyond the dusty streets of Brownsville, Texas. Dreams of serving her country, protecting others, and proving that a woman could do anything a man could do. The Navy recruitment office sat on the corner of Main Street, its pristine white walls and gleaming windows calling to her every time she walked past. Sarah had been preparing for this moment for 3 years, training her body and mind for the grueling challenges that lay ahead. She knew the statistics. Less than 20% of Navy SEAL candidates ever made it through training, and no woman had ever successfully completed the program. But Sarah Martinez wasn't just any woman. Her father, Miguel, had served in the Marines during the Gulf War. He came home with stories of brotherhood, sacrifice, and honor that planted seeds in Sarah's young mind. Her mother, Elena, worked double shifts at the local diner to support the family after Miguel was injured in a construction accident that left him with a permanent limp. Sarah watched her parents struggle with medical bills and financial hardship, but she also saw their unwavering strength and resilience. That strength flowed through her veins like liquid fire. The morning Sarah walked into the recruitment office, the sergeant behind the desk looked up from his paperwork with barely concealed skepticism. Sergeant Johnson was a thick-set man in his 40s with graying hair and calloused hands that spoke of years of hard service. He had seen plenty of young people walk through that door with grand dreams of military glory, only to wash out during basic training. But there was something different about the young woman standing before him. She didn't fidget or look around nervously like most recruits. Instead, she stood at attention with her shoulders squared and her chin raised, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I want to enlist," Sarah said simply, "and I want to try for the SEALs." Sergeant Johnson set down his pen and studied her for a long moment. He had been doing this job for 15 years, and he had developed a sixth sense about people. Some recruits radiated desperation. They were running from something, whether it was poverty, family problems, or their own failures. Others carried themselves with false bravado, trying to convince themselves as much as him that they were tough enough for military life. Sarah Martinez radiated something else entirely. She had the quiet confidence of someone who had already tested herself and knew what she was capable of. When she filled out her paperwork, he noticed the calluses on her hands and the way she moved with the fluid grace of a trained athlete. Her background check revealed an impressive record. High school valedictorian with a full scholarship to Texas A&M that she had turned down to enlist. Black belt in 3 different martial arts. Winner of multiple regional powerlifting competitions in her weight class. Volunteer firefighter for 2 years, with commendations for bravery during a warehouse fire that had saved 3 lives. But none of that would matter once she got to basic underwater demolition/SEAL training, known simply as BUD/S. The instructors there had broken men twice her size who came in with similar credentials. They would push her to limits she couldn't even imagine, testing not just her physical strength, but her mental resilience, her ability to function under extreme stress, and her capacity to work as part of the team when everything inside her screamed to quit. The first phase of BUD/S was 8 weeks of pure physical and mental torture. Candidates were awakened before dawn for punishing runs on the beach, followed by hours of calisthenics, obstacle courses, and underwater exercises that left even the strongest gasping for air. The instructors used a technique called smoking, sudden bursts of intense exercise designed to break down mental barriers and force candidates to dig deeper than they thought possible. Sarah's first day at the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado, California, began at 4 in the morning with the harsh blast of air horns. She rolled out of her narrow bunk alongside 43 other candidates, all of them men who had looked at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility when she first arrived. The head instructor, Master Chief Petty Officer James Rodriguez, was a legend in the SEAL community. He had served in Afghanistan, Iraq, and several classified missions that had earned him decorations most people would never see. He stood before the assembled candidates like a monument to military precision, his uniform pressed to perfection and his dark eyes scanning the group with the intensity of a predator sizing up potential prey. "Look around you," Rodriguez commanded, his voice carrying easily across the training compound. 44 candidates started today. If history is any guide, maybe 8 of you will be standing here when we're done. The rest will quit, get injured, or wash out because they don't have what it takes to earn the privilege of wearing the trident. His gaze lingered on Sarah for just a moment longer than the others, but his expression revealed nothing. She had expected this, the extra scrutiny, the unspoken questions about whether she belonged there. She had prepared herself mentally for the doubt and skepticism she would face. What she hadn't prepared for was how quickly some of her fellow candidates would turn that doubt into active hostility. During the first week of training, 3 men in particular seemed determined to make her life miserable. Jake Morrison was a former college football player from Alabama who stood 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighed 240 pounds. He had the kind of natural athleticism that made difficult exercises look effortless, and he used his size to intimidate anyone he perceived as weak. Tommy Chun had been a competitive swimmer at Stanford before deciding to pursue military service. He was smaller than Morrison, but possessed an almost supernatural endurance in the water that made him a formidable opponent during the swimming portions of training. He rarely spoke directly to Sarah, but she caught him making snide comments to other candidates about women not belonging in combat roles. The third member of what Sarah privately called the Brotherhood of Jerks was Marcus Williams, a former Army Ranger who had transferred to the Navy specifically to try for the SEALs. He had actual combat experience from deployments in Syria and Afghanistan, which gave him a certain credibility with the other candidates. We questioned Sarah's presence in the program. Others listened. The harassment started small. Sarah would find her gear moved or hidden before morning formation. Her bunk would be messed up after she had already made it to military standards. During meals, conversations would stop when she approached tables, leaving her to eat alone while pointed looks and whispered comments followed her around the mess hall. She endured it all without complaint, focusing instead on exceeding every performance standard the instructors set. When they called for a 4-mile run on the beach in full gear, Sarah finished in the top 5. During obstacle course runs, she found ways to compensate for her smaller size with superior technique and mental preparation. In the pool, she matched the swimming times of men who had competed at the collegiate level. But her tormentors escalated their campaign as it became clear that she wasn't going to quit voluntarily. During a particularly brutal training exercise called surf torture, where candidates had to lie in the freezing Pacific Ocean while waves crashed over them for hours, Morrison deliberately positioned himself so that his large body blocked the instructor's view of Sarah. Under cover of the crashing waves and shouted commands, he grabbed her arm and squeezed with enough force to leave finger-shaped bruises on her bicep. "You don't belong here," he hissed in her ear. "Real soldiers are going to die because you're too weak to do the job." Sarah bit back her response and endured the pain, knowing that any reaction would only give him more ammunition to use against her. She had been raised to fight back against bullies, but this situation was different. She was being tested not just by the official training program, but by an unofficial campaign designed to break her spirit and force her to quit. The breaking point came during the 3rd week of training, during an exercise designed to simulate combat conditions under extreme stress. Candidates were divided into pairs and tasked with carrying heavy ammunition cans across an obstacle course while instructors fired blank rounds and threw smoke grenades to create confusion and chaos. Sarah had been paired with David Kim, one of the few candidates who had treated her with basic respect since training began. Kim was a former Marine who had volunteered for SEAL training after completing 2 deployments in Iraq. He was quiet, professional, and focused on his own performance rather than trying to undermine hers. They were making good time through the course when Morrison appeared seemingly out of nowhere. He had finished his own run and was supposed to be cooling down, but instead he positioned himself near a particularly challenging obstacle that required candidates to crawl under barbed wire while carrying their heavy loads. As Sarah low-crawled through the muddy passage, Morrison accidentally kicked one of the metal stakes holding the barbed wire in place. The stake shifted, sending a strand of wire directly into her path. Sarah saw it coming and tried to adjust her position, but the heavy ammunition she was carrying threw off her balance. Her left arm caught on the wire, and she instinctively pulled back, not realizing that Morrison had deliberately loosened another stake behind her. When she jerked backward to free herself, her arm slammed into the metal post with a sickening crack that echoed across the training ground, even over the sound of blank gunfire and shouting instructors. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. Sarah felt something give way in her arm, followed by a wave of nausea that threatened to make her vomit right there in the mud. But she gritted her teeth and kept moving, dragging herself and her equipment through the rest of the obstacle with her right arm while her left arm hung useless at her side. Kim realized something was wrong and tried to help, but Sarah shook her head. "I can finish," she gasped, though every movement sent lightning bolts of agony through her shattered limb. By the time she completed the course, her left arm was swollen and discolored, hanging an unnatural angle that made it clear something was seriously wrong. The training medical officer took one look at her and immediately called for a transport to the base hospital. X-rays revealed a compound fracture of both the radius and ulna bones in her forearm. The break was severe enough that it would require surgery to repair, followed by months of physical therapy. The attending physician, Dr. Patricia Hoffman, delivered the news with professional sympathy, but also with the blunt honesty that military medicine demanded. "I'm sorry, Petty Officer Martinez," she said, using Sarah's training rank. "This type of injury typically requires 6 to 8 months of recovery time before you can return to full duty. That means your current training class will graduate without you. You'll have the option to try again once you're medically cleared, but you'll have to start the entire program over from the beginning." Sarah stared at the X-ray images showing the jagged breaks in her bones and felt something cold settle in her chest. She had trained for 3 years to get to this point. She had endured weeks of harassment and physical torture, pushing her body to limits she hadn't known existed. And now, because of one deliberately sabotaged obstacle, it was all being taken away from her. But as she lay in that hospital bed with her arm immobilized in a complex splint, Sarah Martinez made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She wasn't going to let Morrison and his allies win. She wasn't going to let a broken arm end her dream of becoming a Navy SEAL. She was going to find a way to finish what she started, even if it meant redefining what was possible for someone with her injury. She had no idea how she was going to do it, but failure wasn't an option she was willing to accept. The months that followed Sarah's injury were the darkest period of her life. The surgery had been successful in setting the bones, but the damage was extensive. Metal plates and screws now held her forearm together, and the doctors warned her that she would never regain full strength or mobility in her left arm. During her medical leave, Sarah returned to Texas to recover at her parents' home. The familiar surroundings that had once felt confining now seemed like a refuge from the disappointment and uncertainty that clouded her future. Her mother, Elena, fussed over her constantly, bringing endless cups of coffee and homemade meals while her father, Miguel, tried to cheer her up with stories from his own military service. But Sarah could see the worry in their eyes. They had watched their daughter work toward this dream for years, sacrificing social activities and romantic relationships to focus on training and preparation. Now that dream seemed shattered as completely as the bones in her arm had been. The physical therapy was grueling and often discouraging. Sarah worked with a therapist named Robert Shun. no relation to the Tommy Chun who had made her life miserable during training, who specialized in helping military personnel recover from combat injuries. Robert had served 2 tours in Afghanistan as a Navy corpsman before a roadside bomb ended his military career and led him into rehabilitation medicine. The human body is remarkably adaptable, Robert told her during one of their sessions. I've seen soldiers with missing limbs learn to function at levels that would surprise you. The key is accepting what you've lost while focusing on maximizing what you still have. Sarah appreciated his honesty, but she wasn't ready to accept limitations. Every day, she pushed herself through exercises designed to restore range of motion and rebuild strength in her damaged arm. The progress was slow and painful, marked by small victories measured in degrees of movement rather than pounds lifted or miles run. After 3 months, she had regained about 60% of her grip strength and 70% of her range of motion. The doctors called it excellent progress, but Sarah knew it wasn't enough. The Navy's medical board would never clear her for SEAL training with those limitations. That's when she made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. If her left arm was going to be permanently weakened, she would train her right arm to be twice as strong as normal. She would develop her legs, core, and cardiovascular system to compensate for what she had lost. She would become so proficient with one fully functional arm that the weakness in her left wouldn't matter. Sarah threw herself into this new training regimen with an intensity that worried her family and impressed her physical therapist. She spent hours each day working on exercises that could be performed primarily with one arm. She learned new swimming techniques that relied more on leg power and core strength. She practiced martial arts forms modified for someone with limited use of one limb. The local gym where she had trained before enlisting became her second home. The owner, a former Marine named Carlos Vasquez, had known Sarah since she was 16 and had watched her transform from a determined teenager into a formidable athlete. When she explained what she was trying to accomplish, he immediately offered his support. Most people use injuries as excuses, Carlos told her. But I've seen fighters come back from worse setbacks and become better than they were before. The question isn't whether you can do it. It's whether you want it badly enough to pay the price. Sarah wanted it badly enough to pay any price. She developed a training routine that would have challenged someone with 2 fully functional arms. Her day began at 5 in the morning with a 3-mile run, followed by an hour of swimming at the local pool. Then came weight training focused on exercises that could be performed with one arm or required minimal assistance from her weak left side. She practiced rope climbing using a technique that relied primarily on leg strength and her right arm. She worked on carrying heavy objects for long distances while maintaining speed and endurance. She spent hours on obstacle courses, finding new ways to navigate barriers and challenges that have been designed for people with 2 working arms. The local fire department, where she had volunteered before enlisting, allowed her to train with them during their fitness sessions. Fire Chief Martinez, no relation, despite sharing a last name, was initially skeptical about her ability to perform rescue operations with her injury. But Sarah's determination and innovative problem-solving gradually won him over. "I've never seen anything like it," he told her after watching her successfully carry a dummy victim down a ladder using a technique she had developed that distributed the weight across her entire body instead of relying on arm strength. "You're compensating for your weakness by making everything else stronger." After 6 months of this intense rehabilitation and training, Sarah felt ready to face the Navy's medical board for reevaluation. But first, she needed to prove to herself that she could handle the physical demands of SEAL training with her limitations. She decided to attempt an unofficial version of the BUD/S physical fitness test, using the standards that had been in place when she was injured. The test consisted of a timed swim, push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, and a 4-mile run, with specific minimum standards that had to be met in each category. The swimming portion had always been one of her strengths, and her modified stroke technique actually proved more efficient than her original form. She completed the required distance in a time that would have placed her in the top 10% of candidates. Push-ups presented a unique challenge with her weakened left arm, but Sarah had developed a technique that shifted more weight to her core and legs while still maintaining proper form. She exceeded the minimum requirement, though not by the wide margin she had achieved before her injury. Sit-ups were actually easier than before, as her core strength had increased dramatically during her rehabilitation. Pull-ups were the biggest challenge, requiring her to develop creative gripping techniques and rely heavily on her right arm while using her left primarily for balance and stability. The 4-mile run became a test of mental endurance as much as physical conditioning. The metal hardware in her arm created a slight imbalance that affected her stride, and she had to consciously compensate with subtle adjustments to her form. But she finished within the required time, proving to herself that she could still meet the basic physical standards. More importantly, she had discovered something during her months of modified training. The injury had forced her to develop problem-solving skills and mental resilience that she hadn't possessed before. She had learned to find solutions when the obvious approaches weren't available, to push through pain and discouragement that would have stopped her earlier version of herself. When Sarah returned to the Naval Medical Center for her reevaluation, she carried with her not just improved test scores, but documented proof of her abilities. She had recorded videos of herself performing various physical tasks, obtained letters of recommendation from fire department officials and physical therapy specialists, and prepared a detailed presentation about her modified training techniques. The medical board consisted of 3 doctors and 2 senior enlisted personnel with experience in special operations. They reviewed her medical records, conducted their own physical examination, and watched her perform various exercises under their supervision. Dr. Patricia Hoffman, the same physician who had delivered the initial diagnosis, was part of the review board. She had seen many injured service members during her career, but Sarah's case was unique in several ways. Your range of motion and grip strength in the left arm are still significantly below normal, Dr. Hoffman noted during the examination. However, your overall functional capacity appears to have actually improved since your injury. The compensation techniques you've developed are remarkable. The board spent several hours testing Sarah's abilities and discussing her case in private session. The central question wasn't whether she could perform basic military duties. Her test results clearly demonstrated that capability. The issue was whether someone with her limitations could handle the extreme physical demands of SEAL training and eventual combat operations. Master Chief Rodriguez, who had been Sarah's instructor during her original training cycle, was brought in as a subject matter expert. He had followed her progress during recovery and was familiar with the modified techniques she had developed. Petty Officer Martinez was one of our stronger candidates before the injury, he told the board. Her current physical capabilities would still place her above average compared to most incoming candidates. More importantly, she's developed a level of mental toughness and problem-solving ability that you can't teach in a classroom. The board decision was unprecedented in several ways. They cleared Sarah for return to full duty and approved her request to attempt SEAL training again. However, they imposed several conditions that reflected both the unique nature of her case and their concerns about her safety. She would be required to undergo additional medical monitoring throughout training. She would need to demonstrate proficiency in all training exercises using her modified techniques before being allowed to participate in the more dangerous phases of the program. And if at any point her injury created safety concerns for herself or her teammates, she would be immediately withdrawn from training. Sarah accepted these conditions without hesitation. She understood that she was being given an opportunity that had never been offered to someone with her type of permanent injury. The board was taking a significant risk in allowing her to continue, and she was determined to prove their decision was correct. But returning to Coronado for her second attempt at BUD/S would present challenges beyond the official training program. Morrison, Chun, and Williams had all successfully completed their training and received their SEAL tridents. Word of her return had spread through the special operations community, creating a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and in some cases, outright hostility among both instructors and candidates. Some viewed her as an inspiration, proof that determination and innovation could overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Others saw her as a publicity stunt or a dangerous experiment that put political correctness ahead of military effectiveness. Sarah knew that her second attempt would be scrutinized in ways that her first had never been. She would be fighting not just against the official standards of the training program, but against preconceptions about what someone with a permanent injury could accomplish in special operations. She also knew that this would likely be her only chance. The Navy had made an exception for her based on her unique circumstances and demonstrated abilities. If she failed this time, there would be no third opportunity. As she prepared to return to California, Sarah reflected on how much she had changed during her months of recovery and retraining. The injury that had seemed like the end of her dreams had actually revealed capabilities she hadn't known she possessed. She had learned to see obstacles not as insurmountable barriers, but as problems that required creative solutions. The woman who walked back into the Naval Special Warfare Center was fundamentally different from the one who had been carried out on a stretcher. She was older, wiser, and in some ways stronger than she had been before. She carried with her the confidence that comes from overcoming adversity and the knowledge that she could adapt and overcome challenges that would defeat others. But most importantly, she carried with her an unshakable belief that she belonged there, regardless of what anyone else thought about her injury or her capabilities. She had earned her place through months of grueling work and creative problem-solving. Now she just had to prove it to everyone else. Sarah's return to BUD/S training was met with a mixture of reactions that ranged from genuine curiosity to barely concealed hostility. The new class of candidates included men from diverse backgrounds, former college athletes, experienced military personnel from other branches, and civilians who had spent years preparing for this opportunity. Word of her story had spread through the military community during her recovery. Some candidates viewed her as a legend who had overcome impossible odds to get a second chance. Others saw her as a distraction who was taking up a slot that could have gone to someone without physical limitations. The training cadre had also changed since her first attempt. Master Chief Rodriguez had been promoted and transferred to a new assignment, replaced by Master Chief Petty Officer Sandra Torres, a veteran of multiple combat deployments who had the distinction of being one of the first female instructors assigned to BUD/S support staff. Torres had followed Sarah's case closely during her recovery and had advocated for giving her a second chance. She understood the unique challenges that Sarah would face, not just from the official training program, but from the informal culture of skepticism that surrounded special operations. Martinez, Torres called during the first morning formation. Front and center. Sarah stepped forward and stood at attention while 42 other candidates watched with varying degrees of interest and concern. She could feel their eyes examining her, looking for signs of weakness or accommodation that might indicate she was receiving special treatment. This candidate is returning to training after medical leave, Torres announced to the group. She will be held to the same standards as everyone else. No special treatment, no modifications to the program, no excuses. If anyone has a problem with that, you can discuss it with me privately. The message was clear to both Sarah and her fellow candidates. She would sink or swim based on her own abilities, and anyone who thought they could use her injury as an excuse to undermine the training program would find themselves dealing with Master Chief Torres. The first few weeks of training proceeded much as Sarah remembered from her previous attempt. Pre-dawn runs on the beach, brutal calisthenics sessions, obstacle courses designed to push candidates beyond their perceived limits. The major difference was in Sarah's performance and the reactions of those around her. During her first attempt, Sarah had been motivated primarily by a desire to prove that women could succeed in special operations. This time, her motivation ran deeper. She was fighting not just for herself, but for the principle that physical limitations didn't have to define a person's capabilities. Her modified techniques drew attention from both instructors and candidates. During rope climbing exercises, Sarah used a leg-assisted method that actually proved faster than the traditional arm-over-arm approach used by most candidates. Her swimming stroke, refined during months of one-arm training, was so efficient that she consistently finished in the top 5 during timed swims. The push-up modifications she had developed allowed her to maintain perfect form while compensating for her weakened left arm. Instead of struggling to meet minimum standards, she was exceeding them using techniques that several other candidates began attempting to copy. But it was during the obstacle course runs that Sarah truly began to dominate. The creative problem-solving skills she had developed during recovery allowed her to find efficient paths through barriers that stymied other candidates. Where they used brute force, she used technique. Where they relied on upper body strength, she used leverage and momentum. 3 weeks into training, during a particularly challenging course that combined multiple obstacles with heavy load carrying, Sarah achieved something that stunned both instructors and candidates. She not only finished first among all candidates, but she beat the existing course record by nearly 30 seconds. The achievement was made more remarkable by the fact that she accomplished it while carrying a load that weighed nearly 40% of her body weight, using techniques that maximized her functional strength while minimizing the impact of her injured arm. Master Chief Torres watched the performance with professional interest, making notes on her clipboard while other instructors gathered around to discuss what they had witnessed. Sarah's time wasn't just fast. It demonstrated a level of tactical thinking and physical efficiency that was rarely seen even among successful SEAL candidates. But her success also created new challenges. Some candidates began to resent what they perceived as showboating or attention-seeking behavior. A few tried to argue that her modified techniques represented unfair advantages that other candidates should be allowed to use. The situation came to a head during the 4th week of training, during an exercise called drown-proofing. Candidates were required to complete a series of underwater tasks while their hands and feet were bound, testing their ability to remain calm and functional under extreme stress. The exercise was inherently dangerous, requiring candidates to swim underwater, retrieve objects from the bottom of the pool, and perform various maneuvers while fighting against natural buoyancy and the restriction of their bonds. Several candidates had already been dropped from training after panicking during previous iterations of the exercise. Sarah's approach to drown-proofing had been one of her biggest concerns during preparation. The exercise required precise coordination between arms and legs, and her weakened left arm created additional challenges in maintaining proper body position underwater. She had spent hours during recovery practicing modified techniques in civilian pools, developing methods that relied more heavily on core strength and leg positioning. But she had never attempted the exercise under the stress conditions that would be present during actual training. As her turn approached, Sarah could feel the attention of everyone present focused on her performance. Instructors positioned themselves strategically around the pool to ensure safety, while candidates gathered along the pool deck to watch. The atmosphere was tense with expectation and, from some quarters, hope that she would finally encounter an obstacle she couldn't overcome. The binding process took place under instructor supervision, with zip ties securing her wrists behind her back and additional restraints connecting her ankles. The tightness was calibrated to allow minimal movement while still maintaining circulation and safety. Sarah entered the water with controlled breathing and immediately felt the familiar sensation of her modified swimming position. The bound arms shifted her center of gravity in a way that actually improved her underwater stability, while the restricted leg movement forced her to rely on the core strength she had developed during rehabilitation. The first task required candidates to swim across the pool underwater, surface for 1 breath, then swim back to the starting point. Sarah's modified dolphin kick proved remarkably efficient for this challenge, allowing her to cover the distance with less energy expenditure than many candidates using traditional techniques. The second task involved retrieving a rubber brick from the bottom of the 12-foot deep pool and returning it to the surface. This was where many candidates struggled, as the awkward positioning required to grasp objects with bound hands often led to disorientation and panic. Sarah had practiced this exact scenario dozens of times during her preparation. She dove smoothly to the bottom, used her legs to position herself correctly, and gripped the brick using a technique that distributed the load across her entire upper body rather than relying primarily on arm strength. The third and final task was the most challenging, performing a series of underwater somersaults while maintaining control and orientation. This exercise was designed to induce vertigo and panic, testing candidates' ability to remain calm when their normal spatial references were disrupted. As Sarah began the somersaults, something unexpected happened. The months of training with limited use of her left arm had forced her to develop an enhanced awareness of body position and movement that served her well in this disorienting environment. While other candidates often lost track of their orientation during the rotations, Sarah maintained a clear sense of up and down throughout the exercise. She completed all required rotations smoothly and surfaced exactly where the instructors had specified, her breathing controlled and her expression calm. The pool deck was silent as she was helped from the water and her restraints were removed. Master Chief Torres nodded approvingly as she made notes on her evaluation sheet. Outstanding performance, Martinez. Next candidate. But the real impact of Sarah's performance wasn't reflected in the instructor's evaluation. Several candidates who had been openly skeptical about her presence in the program approached her after the exercise to ask about her techniques. Others simply nodded with respect as she passed, acknowledging that she had earned her place through demonstrated ability rather than accommodation. The shift in attitude wasn't universal. A small group of candidates, led by a former Army Ranger named Brett Davidson, continued to view her success with suspicion and resentment. Davidson had entered BUD/S with an attitude similar to Morrison's during Sarah's first attempt. The belief that special operations was an exclusively male domain and that women's inclusion was a political compromise that weakened the program. But Davidson was more subtle in his opposition than Morrison had been. Instead of direct harassment, he used psychological tactics designed to undermine Sarah's confidence and isolate her from potential allies among the other candidates. He spread rumors that she was receiving modified standards or instructor assistance that wasn't available to other candidates. He questioned whether her techniques should be allowed, arguing that they gave her unfair advantages that other candidates couldn't use because of program restrictions. Most insidiously, he began suggesting that her presence created additional risks for the entire class because instructors had to spend extra time monitoring her safety and modifying exercises to accommodate her limitations. These psychological attacks were more difficult to combat than the direct harassment she had faced during her first attempt. Sarah couldn't prove that the rumors were false, and she couldn't demonstrate that her techniques were available to anyone willing to learn them without seeming to be teaching other candidates, which was against program rules. The situation reached a crisis point during the 5th week of training, when the class began combat conditioning exercises that simulated battlefield conditions. These exercises were designed to test candidates' ability to function under extreme physical and mental stress while making tactical decisions and working as part of a team. During one particular scenario, candidates were divided into small teams and given a mission that required them to navigate through a complex obstacle course while under simulated enemy fire. The exercise combined physical challenges with problem-solving requirements, testing both individual capabilities and group dynamics. Sarah was assigned to a team that included Davidson and 2 other candidates who had been influenced by his campaign against her. From the moment the exercise began, it was clear that her teammates were not planning to work with her as an equal partner. They excluded her from planning discussions, ignored her tactical suggestions, and positioned themselves in ways that prevented her from contributing effectively to the team's movement through the course. when she attempted to take initiative and demonstrate alternative approaches to obstacles. Davidson actively countermanded her actions and redirected the team's efforts. The result was a performance that failed to meet instructor standards and resulted in the entire team being smoked, subjected to intense corrective physical training as punishment for their poor execution. During the punishment session, Davidson made it clear that he blamed Sarah for the team's failure, arguing that her limitations had prevented them from using tactics that would have been successful with an all-male team. Sarah endured the physical punishment without complaint, but she recognized that the situation was becoming untenable. If Davidson succeeded in turning the entire class against her, she would face the same isolation and harassment that had contributed to her injury during the first attempt. That evening, Master Chief Torres called Sarah to her office for a private discussion. Torres had observed the team dynamics during the exercise and recognized the signs of the destructive group behavior she had seen destroy promising candidates in previous classes. Martinez, Torres said, "I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. Are you experiencing harassment or interference from other candidates that's affecting your performance?" Sarah considered her response carefully. She could report Davidson's behavior and likely get him removed from training, but doing so would confirm the suspicions of candidates who believed she was receiving special protection. Alternatively, she could handle the situation herself, but that might lead to confrontations that could result in her own removal from the program. "Master Chief," Sarah finally replied, "I'm here to become a SEAL. Whatever challenges I face from other candidates, I need to prove I can handle them the same way I'll handle challenges in combat. I'd rather find a way to earn their respect through performance than have problems solved for me." Torres studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "That's what I hoped you'd say. But understand that there's a difference between earning respect and allowing yourself to be sabotaged by people who don't want you to succeed. If the situation becomes unsafe or prevents you from demonstrating your actual capabilities, you need to let me know." Sarah left the meeting with a clearer understanding of both the challenges she faced and the support that was available if she needed it. But she also knew that the real test wasn't just whether she could complete the training program's official requirements. She had to prove that she could function effectively as part of a team, even when some team members were actively working against her. The solution she developed was both simple and brilliant. Instead of trying to change Davidson's attitude or convince skeptical candidates to accept her, she would demonstrate her value so clearly and consistently that their objections would become irrelevant. She would make herself indispensable to any team she joined, regardless of their personal feelings about her presence. Sarah's strategy of making herself indispensable began to take effect during the 6th week of training, when the class moved into advanced tactical exercises that required complex problem-solving and team coordination. These scenarios were designed to simulate real-world mission conditions where failure could mean the difference between life and death. The first major test came during a nighttime navigation exercise that required teams to move through unfamiliar terrain while avoiding detection by instructor-controlled enemy forces. Each team was given map coordinates for multiple objectives that had to be reached within strict time limits, with penalties for being spotted by opposing forces. Sarah found herself assigned to a team with 3 candidates who had maintained neutral attitudes toward her, neither openly hostile like Davidson nor particularly supportive. They viewed her as a fellow candidate who deserved a fair chance to prove herself, but they weren't prepared to make special accommodations for her limitations. The team leader was Michael Santos, a former Marine Corps sergeant who had distinguished himself in previous exercises through steady leadership and tactical competence. Santos had watched Sarah's performances throughout training with professional interest, noting her problem-solving abilities while remaining cautious about her integration into team dynamics. During the mission planning phase, Santos distributed responsibilities based on each team member's demonstrated strengths. Sarah was initially assigned to communications and navigation, roles that would keep her in the center of the team formation rather than requiring her to take point or serve as rearguard. But as the team began moving through the dark terrain, Sarah's unique skills quickly became apparent. Her modified movement techniques, developed during rehabilitation, allowed her to move more quietly than teammates who relied on conventional approaches. The enhanced spatial awareness she had developed to compensate for her injury made her exceptionally good at detecting obstacles and threats in low-light conditions. When the team encountered their first challenge, a steep ravine that couldn't be bypassed, Sarah studied the terrain and proposed a crossing method that other team members hadn't considered. Instead of the obvious approach that would require significant upper body strength, she identified a route that used natural features to provide support and leverage. Her technique not only proved faster than the conventional method, but it allowed the entire team to cross without the noise and exposure that typically accompanied such obstacles. Santos watched her performance with growing respect, recognizing that her injury had forced her to develop tactical thinking skills that enhanced rather than limited her effectiveness. The second objective required the team to infiltrate a simulated enemy compound and gather intelligence without being detected. This was exactly the type of scenario where Sarah's critics expected her to become a liability, requiring her teammates to compensate for her physical limitations. Instead, Sarah's approach to the problem revealed capabilities that her critics hadn't anticipated. She identified an infiltration route that avoided the most heavily defended approaches, using observation techniques she had learned during her firefighting experience to read building layouts and security patterns. When the team needed to scale a fence that surrounded the compound, Sarah's modified climbing techniques actually proved superior to conventional methods. Her leg-dominant approach was quieter and more controlled than the arm-heavy techniques used by most candidates, allowing the entire team to enter undetected. Inside the compound, Sarah's enhanced awareness and problem-solving abilities continued to prove valuable. She noticed details that other team members missed, subtle signs of recent activity, equipment positioning that indicated guard routines, and structural features that could be used for concealment or escape routes. The team successfully completed all mission objectives without detection, a result achieved by fewer than 20% of teams in previous training cycles. During the after-action review, Santos made it clear that Sarah's contributions had been essential to their success. Martinez identified the infiltration route, developed our crossing technique for the ravine, and spotted 3 potential threat indicators that the rest of us missed, he reported to the instructors. This team succeeded because every member contributed their unique capabilities to solve problems we encountered. Word of Sarah's performance began to spread among candidates who had previously been skeptical about her abilities. The success wasn't just about her individual skills. It demonstrated that she could enhance team performance rather than limiting it, which was a crucial distinction in special operations culture. But her growing reputation also intensified opposition from Davidson and his allies, who viewed her success as a threat to their own standing in the class. Davidson began spreading new rumors, suggesting that instructors were providing Sarah with advanced information about exercises or modifying scenarios to favor her unique skill set. The confrontation that had been building throughout training finally erupted during the 7th week, when the class began combat simulation exercises that combined physical challenges with tactical decision-making under extreme stress. These scenarios were designed to identify candidates who could maintain effectiveness when exhaustion, fear, and confusion degraded their normal capabilities. Sarah's team for this exercise included Davidson, who had specifically requested assignment with her team after learning that the scenario would involve close-quarters combat simulation and heavy equipment carrying. He clearly expected these challenges to expose the limitations that would prove she didn't belong in special operations. The exercise scenario required the team to assault a fortified position while carrying wounded teammates and heavy equipment across difficult terrain. It was exactly the type of challenge where upper body strength would normally be decisive and where Sarah's injury might prevent her from contributing effectively. Davidson made his intentions clear during the planning phase, arguing that Sarah should be assigned to rear guard duties where her limitations wouldn't endanger the mission. When she attempted to suggest alternative approaches that might prove more effective, he cut her off and insisted that the team would use conventional tactics that had been proven successful in previous iterations. But when the exercise began, Sarah's tactical thinking quickly became essential to the team's survival. The instructor-controlled opposing force had been positioned in ways that made conventional assault tactics extremely costly. Direct approaches that relied primarily on physical force would expose the team to simulated casualties that would result in exercise failure. Sarah identified weaknesses in the defensive positioning that could be exploited using coordinated movement and misdirection rather than brute force assault. Her plan would allow the team to achieve their objectives while minimizing exposure to enemy fire, but it required Davidson to acknowledge her tactical leadership. Davidson rejected her suggestions and ordered the team to proceed with his original plan, which involved a frontal assault that would showcase the physical capabilities of male team members while relegating Sarah to a support role. The result was predictable. The team suffered multiple simulated casualties within minutes and failed to achieve any of their primary objectives. During the after-action review, instructors made it clear that the team's failure was due to poor tactical decision-making rather than individual physical limitations. Master Chief Torres specifically noted that alternative approaches had been available that might have led to mission success. This exercise tests your ability to adapt tactics to available resources and mission requirements, she told the assembled candidates. Teams that try to force inappropriate tactics because of personal preferences or biases typically fail, regardless of their individual capabilities. The message was clear to everyone present, including Davidson. His insistence on conventional tactics had cost his team the exercise, while Sarah's suggested alternatives might have led to success. Several candidates who had previously supported Davidson began to distance themselves from his campaign against Sarah. But Davidson wasn't prepared to accept that his attitudes might be wrong. Instead of reconsidering his approach, he escalated his efforts to undermine Sarah's position in the class. He began approaching individual candidates privately, trying to build a coalition that would formally complain about her presence in the program. His arguments focused on safety concerns, suggesting that Sarah's limitations created additional risks for everyone and that instructors were compromising training standards to accommodate her. He argued that her success in recent exercises was due to instructor favoritism rather than genuine capability. Some candidates were receptive to these arguments, particularly those who were struggling with their own performance and looking for external explanations for their difficulties. But a larger number were beginning to recognize that Sarah's presence actually enhanced rather than diminished the training experience. Her innovative techniques and problem-solving approaches had introduced new methods that several candidates began incorporating into their own skill sets. Her success demonstrated that there were multiple paths to achieving mission objectives, which was a valuable lesson for future special operations personnel. The crisis reached its peak during the 8th week of training, when the class began Hell Week, the most notorious portion of BUD/S training. Hell Week consisted of 5.5 days of continuous training with minimal sleep, designed to push candidates beyond their physical and mental limits to test their fundamental character and determination. Davidson saw Hell Week as his final opportunity to prove that Sarah couldn't handle the ultimate challenges of SEAL training. He believed that the extreme physical demands and sleep deprivation would finally expose limitations that hadn't been apparent during shorter exercises. Sarah understood that Hell Week would be her ultimate test, not just of her physical capabilities, but of her acceptance by the candidate class as a whole. The isolation and stress of the week-long ordeal would break down normal social barriers, revealing the true character of both herself and her fellow candidates. She had prepared for this moment throughout her recovery and retraining, developing physical and mental techniques specifically designed to help her survive the legendary trial. But she also knew that her success would depend as much on her relationships with other candidates as on her individual performance. Hell Week began on Sunday evening with a surprise inspection that awakened candidates from their first real sleep in days. From that moment forward, They would be subjected to continuous physical training, tactical exercises, and mental challenges designed to eliminate anyone who lacked the fundamental drive to become a Navy SEAL. The first night established patterns that would define the entire week. Sarah's modified techniques proved remarkably effective under extreme fatigue conditions, while her problem-solving abilities helped her team navigate challenges that defeated other groups. But, more importantly, her consistent performance and positive attitude began to win over candidates who had previously been neutral or skeptical about her presence. By the second day, even some of Davidson's former allies were beginning to work cooperatively with Sarah during team exercises. They had seen her perform under conditions that would have broken weaker candidates, and they could no longer deny that she had earned her place in the class through demonstrated capability. Davidson himself was struggling more than he had anticipated. The psychological pressure of maintaining his opposition to Sarah while dealing with his own physical challenges was taking a toll that became apparent to both instructors and fellow candidates. His performance began to decline as he focused more energy on undermining Sarah than on meeting training standards. On the third day of Hell Week, during a particularly brutal exercise that required teams to carry heavy rubber boats while running on the beach, Davidson finally made the mistake that ended his campaign against Sarah. Frustrated by her continued success and his own declining performance, he deliberately created a situation that he hoped would result in her injury or failure. As Sarah's team navigated through the surf with their boat, Davidson positioned himself in a way that would cause her to lose her footing and potentially be crushed beneath the heavy equipment. It was a calculated action designed to look like an accident while creating real danger for Sarah and her teammates. But Sarah's enhanced awareness, developed through months of compensating for her injury, allowed her to recognize the threat and adjust her position to avoid the trap. More importantly, several other candidates witnessed Davidson's deliberate action and immediately reported it to the instructors. Master Chief Torres confronted Davidson within hours, presenting evidence of his deliberate attempt to endanger another candidate. The action violated fundamental principles of military conduct and SEAL team culture, where the safety of teammates was considered sacred regardless of personal disagreements. Davidson was immediately removed from training and faced potential disciplinary action that could affect his military career. His departure sent a clear message to the remaining candidates about the difference between legitimate competition and dangerous sabotage. But the real impact of the incident was in how other candidates rallied around Sarah in its aftermath. They had seen her face a serious threat with grace and professionalism, never allowing personal attacks to interfere with her performance or commitment to the team. She had proven that she possessed not just physical capabilities, but the character traits that define successful special operations personnel. The removal of Davidson from training marked a turning point in Sarah's journey that went beyond eliminating a single antagonist. His departure created space for authentic relationships to develop between Sarah and her fellow candidates. Relationships based on mutual respect earned through shared hardship rather than forced acceptance of diversity mandates. During the remaining days of Hell Week, Sarah found herself integrated into the class in ways that she had never experienced during her first attempt at training. Candidates who had maintained polite but distant relationships began including her in the informal support networks that helped everyone survive the brutal week-long ordeal. Michael Santos, who had observed her tactical skills during earlier exercises, began seeking her input during planning sessions for team challenges. Other candidates started asking about her modified techniques, not as novelties, but as potentially useful skills that could enhance their own performance. Most significantly, Sarah discovered that her injury had given her unique insights into mental resilience that proved valuable to classmates who were struggling with their own challenges. Her experience overcoming what had seemed like an insurmountable setback provided perspective that helped other candidates push through moments of doubt and despair. On Thursday night of Hell Week, as the class huddled together on the beach during a brief rest period between exercises, candidate James Murphy approached Sarah with a problem that revealed how much attitudes had changed. Murphy was a former college wrestler who had dominated most physical challenges throughout training, but he was struggling with an exercise that required precise underwater navigation in cold, murky water. "Martinez," he said quietly, "I've watched your swimming techniques during pool training. You've developed some kind of system for maintaining orientation underwater that's different from what they teach. I'm having problems with vertigo during the long swims, and I'm worried I'm going to wash out if I can't figure out." Sarah's response demonstrated both her technical expertise and her understanding of team dynamics. She spent the next 20 minutes teaching Murphy breathing and body positioning techniques that she had developed to compensate for her arm injury, methods that proved remarkably effective for managing underwater disorientation. More importantly, she did it without drawing attention from instructors or making Murphy feel that he was receiving unfair assistance. She framed her advice as sharing techniques that were available to anyone willing to learn them, maintaining the principle that all candidates should succeed or fail based on their own efforts. Murphy successfully completed the underwater exercise the next day, and word of Sarah's helped spread quietly through the class. Several other candidates began approaching her for advice on specific technical challenges, creating informal mentoring relationships that strengthened the overall group cohesion. Hell Week concluded on Friday afternoon with a ceremony that marked the transition from BUD/S first phase to the more technical training phases that followed. Of the 43 candidates who had started the week, only 19 remained. Sarah stood among the survivors, wearing the brown t-shirt that indicated successful completion of the most grueling portion of SEAL training. But for Sarah, the completion of Hell Week represented more than just a personal victory. She had proven that her modified techniques and adaptive approaches weren't just individual accommodations, but potentially valuable innovations that could benefit the entire special operations community. Master Chief Torres addressed the surviving candidates during the ceremony, acknowledging both their individual achievements and the group dynamics that had developed during the week. "You've learned something this week that goes beyond physical endurance," Torres told them. "You've discovered that teams become stronger when they find ways to maximize everyone's capabilities rather than trying to force everyone into the same mold. That lesson will serve you well in combat operations where adaptability and innovation often make the difference between mission success and failure." The second phase of BUD/S training focused on diving and underwater operations, areas where Sarah's swimming modifications proved particularly valuable. Her efficient stroke techniques and enhanced underwater awareness made her one of the top performers in the class, while her problem-solving abilities helped her master complex diving procedures more quickly than many candidates. During a particularly challenging exercise that required candidates to share breathing equipment underwater while navigating through underwater obstacles, Sarah's small size and efficient movement became significant advantages. She could move through tight spaces that challenged larger candidates, and her precise control allowed her to conserve oxygen while maintaining effectiveness. The third phase concentrated on land warfare and demolitions training, where Sarah's tactical thinking and creative problem-solving reached full expression. The complex scenarios required candidates to integrate multiple skill sets while making rapid decisions under stress, conditions where her adaptive approaches proved extremely valuable. During one memorable exercise, Sarah's team was assigned a mission that required them to breach a fortified position using explosives while minimizing collateral damage to simulated civilian structures nearby. The challenge required precise placement of charges and careful timing to achieve tactical objectives without causing unacceptable secondary effects. Sarah analyzed the target structure and proposed a demolitions approach that used smaller charges placed at precisely calculated points rather than the conventional method of overwhelming force. Her technique achieved the required tactical effect while reducing explosive requirements by more than 40%, a result that impressed both instructors and demolition specialists observing the exercise. Her success wasn't just technical. It demonstrated the type of innovative thinking that Special Operations Forces needed to handle complex mission requirements in real-world environments where simple solutions often weren't available. As training progressed through its final weeks, Sarah found herself in the unexpected position of being sought out by other candidates, not just for technical advice, but for leadership on team exercises. Her combination of tactical competence, mental resilience, and collaborative approach made her a natural choice for team leadership roles. The transformation was remarkable to observe. The woman who had been viewed with skepticism and hostility during her first training attempt was now respected as one of the most capable candidates in her class. Her injury, which had initially seemed like an insurmountable obstacle, had become the foundation for skills that enhanced her effectiveness as a special operations professional. The graduation ceremony for BUD/S Class 347 took place on a bright California morning in front of family members, friends, and senior military officials who had come to witness the completion of one of the military's most challenging training programs. 19 candidates had survived the 6-month ordeal, earning the right to continue their training toward becoming Navy SEALs. Sarah's parents had flown in from Texas to witness their daughter's achievement. Elena Martinez wept openly as she watched Sarah receive her certificate of completion, while Miguel stood with military bearing despite his civilian clothes, pride evident in his posture and expression. Admiral Patricia Williams, the first female flag officer to oversee special operations training, delivered the keynote address to the graduating class. She spoke about the evolution of special operations and the importance of adapting to meet new challenges while maintaining the core values that define military excellence. The candidates graduating today represent the future of naval special warfare, Admiral Williams said. They have demonstrated not just individual courage and competence, but the ability to work together as teams that are stronger than the sum of their parts. They have shown that innovation and adaptability are not signs of weakness, but essential strengths in modern military operations. As Sarah stood with her classmates receiving their certificates, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The injury that had shattered her arm had also shattered her assumptions about what was possible and what methods could be used to achieve seemingly impossible goals. She had learned that obstacles could become opportunities if approached with creativity and determination. Her physical limitation had forced her to develop mental capabilities that enhanced her effectiveness beyond what she had possessed before the injury. The harassment and skepticism she had faced had strengthened her character and refined her leadership abilities. But most importantly, she had proven that belonging in special operations wasn't about fitting into predetermined categories, but about contributing unique capabilities that enhance team performance. Her success hadn't required anyone to lower standards or make accommodations. It had demonstrated that diversity of approaches and backgrounds could actually raise the overall capability of Special Operations Forces. The ceremony concluded with the traditional bell ringing that marked the end of BUD/S training for successful candidates. Each graduate rang the bell once, signifying their transition from candidates to SEAL trainees who would continue their training in advanced schools and specialized programs. When Sarah's turn came, she gripped the rope with her right hand while her left provided support and balance. The sound of the bell carried across the training compound, heard by hundreds of current candidates who were struggling through their own phases of the program. Among those listening was a new class of first-phase candidates that included the first group of women to be admitted to BUD/S training under recently changed policies. They watched Sarah ring the bell and saw proof that the path they were attempting was not just theoretically possible, but practically achievable. After the ceremony, as families gathered for photographs and celebrations, Master Chief Torres approached Sarah for a private conversation. Torres had watched Sarah's entire journey from her return to training through her successful completion, and she wanted to share some final thoughts. Martinez, Torres said, I want you to understand what you've accomplished here. You haven't just completed SEAL training. You've expanded our understanding of what's possible in special operations. The techniques you've developed and the leadership you've demonstrated have made this entire program better." She paused, looking out over the training compound where new candidates were already beginning their own journeys toward earning the SEAL Trident. More importantly, you've shown that the question isn't whether someone with limitations can succeed in special operations. The question is whether someone has the character, intelligence, and determination to find ways to contribute regardless of the challenges they face. You've answered that question definitively. Sarah's journey continued beyond BUD/S graduation through advanced training schools where she specialized in combat diving and underwater demolitions. Her unique combination of technical skills and innovative thinking made her a valuable addition to operational teams that were increasingly called upon to handle complex missions in challenging environments. 3 years later, Petty Officer First Class Sarah Martinez was deployed with SEAL Team 5 to conduct operations in the Pacific Theater. Her team was tasked with training Allied naval forces in advanced diving techniques and special operations tactics, a mission that put her technical expertise and teaching abilities to use in real-world military operations. During one training exercise with Philippine naval forces, Sarah demonstrated the modified underwater techniques she had developed during her recovery from injury. The Filipino divers were amazed by the efficiency and effectiveness of her methods, and several began incorporating her approaches into their own training programs. Captain Rodriguez, her commanding officer, watched the international training session with professional satisfaction. Sarah had become exactly the type of naval special warfare professional that the service needed: technically competent, tactically innovative, and capable of building relationships that enhance mission effectiveness. "Martinez has redefined what we thought was possible," he wrote in her fitness report. Her unique background and adaptive capabilities make her one of the most effective operators I've had the privilege to command. She consistently finds solutions to problems that others hadn't even recognized, and her leadership enhances the performance of every team she joins. Sarah's story became part of SEAL training lore, told to new candidates as an example of how apparent limitations could become strengths when approached with creativity and determination. Her techniques were incorporated into official training curricula, and her approach to problem-solving became a model for adaptive leadership in special operations. But perhaps the most significant impact of her journey was in inspiring others to reconsider their own assumptions about what was possible. The woman who had been told that a broken arm would end her military dreams had instead used that setback as the foundation for achievements that exceeded anything she had originally thought possible. She had proven that the human spirit's capacity for adaptation and growth could overcome obstacles that seemed insurmountable. Her success opened doors not just for herself, but for countless others who would follow in her footsteps, carrying with them the knowledge that determination and innovation could triumph over any limitation. In the end, Sarah Martinez had achieved something far more significant than becoming a Navy SEAL. She had demonstrated that true strength wasn't about avoiding challenges or overcoming them through brute force alone. True strength was about finding ways to transform obstacles into opportunities, to use setbacks as stepping stones to achievements that would have been impossible without them. The title Navy SEAL had been her goal, but the journey toward that goal had revealed capabilities she never knew she possessed. She had learned that breaking can be the beginning of becoming stronger, and that sometimes the most devastating injuries lead to the most remarkable discoveries about what human beings can accomplish when they refuse to accept limitations as permanent boundaries. Her broken arm had healed, but it had left her with something far more valuable than the physical strength she had lost. It had given her the wisdom to see challenges as opportunities, the creativity to find solutions where others saw only problems, and the leadership skills to help others discover their own potential for growth and achievement. Sarah Martinez had indeed been shattered, but she had rebuilt herself into something far stronger than she had been before. And in doing so, she had shown others that their own apparent limitations might actually be the keys to unlocking capabilities they had never imagined possessing.